to the October 28th, 2020 meeting of the Rotary Club of New York, Host Club of America. We're very fortunate this evening in that our guests are quite unusual. They're really top shelf. They're experts in their fields. You know, I was discussing this with a few of the members of our club earlier this morning. Perhaps by naming this series of Zoom meetings, Youth Empowerment, we have sent out a message that if you're not young, this is not for you. And I must tell you that is anything but correct. These Zoom meetings and these presenters tonight are fabulous people that are of value to everyone and every age bracket. Matter of fact, I was reading an essay by Warren Buffett this morning in which he discussed something called reverse mentorship. And he said that all of us should find a reverse mentor, someone who is younger than us, may not have as much experience in life as we have, but is very tech savvy and holds other expertise in unfamiliar terrain to us. This is what he said was the secret to his success. And so I'm very honored, very pleased tonight to have Sini, and Olivier Oullier as our guests. And I'm going to hand over the show to Merchador and Ballor, who is chair of our membership committee, was so gracious to make the arrangements to tonight's program. So sit back, take notes. I think you're going to find this presentation tonight to be particularly valuable, especially during times of COVID. Ballor.
Thank you so much, President Gerard, and thank you so much for distinguished guest speakers and moderators and Rotarians and global shapers also joining this call. I'm gonna give a brief introduction of each speakers and moderators. And this session is gonna be recorded, and there would be 20 minutes moderated session and then 10 minutes Q&A. So I encourage you guys to start writing your questions on the chat box, and then the moderator is gonna choose your questions and gonna ask from the speaker. Since our time is limited, we need to be like time cautious. So Sini is a general partner at the Partech, and he has over 20 years of experience in various executive technologies and product roles at both large and startup software companies. Since 2012, Gene has been investing in and advising early stage technology startups, including Treasure Data and Financial and Thea, among others. Gene holds Master of Science in Computer Science from Silicon Paris Tech and DA in Computer Science from Université Pierre at Marie Curie in Paris. Gene is also an avid kiteboarder and snowboarder, and also I want to add he's an incredible dancer. And this session would be moderated by Creative Technologies Global Shaper LA Hub alumni Prince Basher. And Prince is inspiring activists, creatives, and technologists and at the intersection of civic media and technology peak, and his curiosity. And he has worked on projects with 300 Entertainment, AWC, Interscope, Funny or Die, Fullscreen, etc., etc. And in between, he has been contently at Little Cast, Joys, and Finn. And Prince volunteers national and international communities, including Global Shapers community and LA Hub, and FedTech, On Deck, and South Park Commons, and the US Digital Common. So next session, the second session would be led by Olivier Oullier. Professor Olivier is a president of the MOTV, the global leader in personalized neuroinformatics, and he's the former head of strategy and global health and healthcare and member of executive committee of the World Economic Forum, who named him as a young global leader. And Olivier is a full-time professor of behavioral and brain science at Aix-Marseille University and taught at the universities of Oxford and Geneva's executive education programs. And he's a lab his lab applied research focused on consumer behavior, engagement, influence, social coordination, dynamics, and decision neuroscience. On top of that, his academic and business career, he's a neuro DJ and a founder of DJs for Good initiative. And this session will be moderated by Grammy recognized artist. We're very fortunate composer, producer. We are music pioneer and educator Maria Burdovskaya. And she's also executive music producer at United Nations Global Music Event for International Day of Youth. And Cherry Chung, she's a co-creator of the Global Shapers New York Hub, and she works at Propel and helps low-income Americans improve their financial health. And Cherry is very passionate about building strong communities for impact. She's a graduate from Georgetown University in School of Foreign Service and International Economics degree. And I really appreciate everyone for putting their effort and time, and stage is all yours, Prince and Jean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Balor. I really appreciate that warm introduction. Was going to introduce Jean, but seems like Balor did an amazing job. But let's just kick right off into things. But before we get into that, let me frame kind of the conversation around youth empowerment, where this moderated session is on investing in tech innovations. And so the first part of it, we just want to hit the state of play, what's going on in the world, what are the trends, and then go a little bit deeper into startups, startup innovation specifically, what's actually happening, and then what does the future of startups look like. So if we kind of look at the state of the economy, unemployment has recently spiked. It is coming down a little bit, but something to take in consideration. Obviously the stock market is back to a normal state, but things obviously really change. And then COVID has come through and has changed a ton of behaviors, everything from cooking to exercise, as well as scrapboarding is up 100%. But Jean at Partech is obviously seeing this whole range of things. And so, Jean, can you please tell us kind of what are the trends that COVID has making society shift into?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you, all of you, for having me tonight. It's a great pleasure. I don't know that original thought is easy to come by these days. So I'll borrow unabashedly from everything I've been consuming on what is evidently a topic on everyone's mind, right? How do we make sense of what's going on right now, and of the sort of the state of chaos that we're in? The best framework I've seen sort of tries to sort of divide and conquer the problem, so to speak, into sort of like short-term benefit. Think about it as like a 2x2 matrix, right? Where you think about like a negative effect versus a positive effect on one axis, and then on the other, you think about long-term structural change versus short-term ephemeral change, right? Putting on my investor hat for a second, the kind of stuff you want to invest in right now would fall into one of two quadrants. Either what's going to see a long-term benefit from a world that's gone, a little bit less spontaneous when it comes to physical interaction, right? Or a world that's trying to build resilience in a context where pandemics might not be a one-off event, but something we should get used to, right? So that would include, for instance, remote work, remote education, this kind of stuff. Stuff that's suffering on a more ephemeral basis might also translate in great investment opportunities, because obviously these things are underpriced right now, right? So a good example of that would be traveling for fun, traveling for leisure, right? It's something that we've all refrained from doing because we want to avoid getting our loved ones sick. But it's something that people have a lot of pent-up demand for, right? So without presuming of a time frame, we know that this is something that's going to make a comeback, right? Do we change our outlook on what that kind of stuff is poised to do in the next 2-3 years? Probably not. If we are looking for value, it's probably a good time. Conversely, things that we believe are essentially set up for long-term negative effects, right? What do we think is going to happen to business travel? Now that we've established over the past 10 months that people can function really well without traveling. You know, I was having a call with a fellow investor yesterday who was telling me that is kind of embarrassed to admit it, but it's been 40% more efficient. Don't quote me exactly on the number. I don't know how he got to that, but the point being is not wasting time anymore going from one meeting to another in his car. So he's able to pack his days much more efficiently. He's able to take time to actually do more research. And suddenly as an investor, he comes out ahead, right? And it's like, I don't know what to tell you about this. I'm not happy about it. I'm not unhappy about it, but I know that I'm not going to get on planes anymore and not in my car to go to a meeting as often, right? And so that's certainly, you know, an area where you wouldn't want to be placing bets right now. Commercial real estate would be a great proxy for that, right? Like there's going to be a massive transformation in the space. Who knows where we land, but certainly for the next 5 years, you're going to see a lot of chaos, right? So I don't know if I'm answering your question, Prince, but you know, just a little framework that I found to be pretty useful.
Yeah, and so before I moved to Silicon Valley, these idea of mental models was something I wasn't familiar with. So glad you're pulling them out and using it as a frame of reference. And
Charlie Munger is the one. If you're going to read one book, is All I Want to Know Is Where I'm Going to Die, So I Never Go There, by Charlie Munger, who's Warren Buffett's you know, as partner and has been for like decades, right? And he's a great mental model guy.
I would be curious if Berkshire is sponsoring this, because we've had Charlie and Warren mentioned. And so thanks for that answer. I think that kind of like gives a wide scope of what we're about to dive into, but let's kind of ground a little bit where, as we were talking about startups, right? So VC funding, surprisingly, on this past quarter has been at its second highest point in the past 2 years. And so obviously that's optimistic, but where do you stand in the growth of venture capital over the next 2 years, given the market?
So I can briefly touch on sort of how we've behaved over the past 6 months. And then I'll try and look forward. We initially stopped for about 3 to 4 weeks, aggressively looking to invest. And I'm using these terms on purpose, right? A venture investor is not a day trader. We don't wake up in the morning saying like, look, I need to make, you know, a bunch of trades today. It takes a long time to nurture companies that we get excited enough about and we build enough conviction about to actually write a check. We can probably talk about this some more later in the conversation. So there's no such thing as like hitting the brakes 100% and then hitting the gas pedal 100% the next day, right? These things take time to ramp up and down. With that said, we spent the first 3 weeks sort of focusing on our existing portfolio, right? So the founders, the teams, the companies we had already invested in. And our goal there was really to make sure that those companies, those guys, had enough runway to weather the storm. And what that translated into very concretely is, you know, making extremely harsh assumptions about what in March, you know, lied ahead, right? We wanted to make sure that they had 18 to 24 months of runway, no matter what. For some of them, that was already built in because they had just raised money and they were fine. For others, it meant going back out and sort of you know, without wasting too much time. I don't want to say in a hurry, but without wasting time, securing another bridge round of equity financing or, you know, even venture debt, right? Once we figured out that, you know, our portfolio somehow seemed to be fairly resilient, we shift back to sort of a more outbound sort of, you know, forward stance where we started investing again. And so now, you know, fast forwarding to today, we made a number of bets during the pandemic. I personally ended up leading 2 rounds, one a Series A. We haven't announced it yet. The other one a Series B in a company that's headquartered in New York that is called Medigate, and those guys are building security for medical devices. And we felt that, if anything, unfortunately, the COVID crisis was, in many ways validating the need for better security around all this stuff. I can elaborate on that if it's interesting to anyone. But so that's where we stand as of today. Looking forward, I would say we're optimistic, but we're cautiously optimistic. And the reason is so much of the short-term, I wouldn't call it euphoria, but the short-term enthusiasm that you're seeing in the market has been, in large part, a reflection on what's happening in the public markets, right? You've mentioned that technology is up 50%. It's hard to miss these days. If you invest in XLK, like the technology index, if you invest in the Nasdaq, you're probably looking good this year. I would say unambiguously, technology stocks or technology companies rather, have shown that pretty much they're the only companies that are doing well in this market. With that said, the caveat I think that is important to underline is the fact that so much of our so-called K-shaped recovery, right, relies heavily on significant stimulus packages that we've been injecting in the system. What happens when this ends, and for how long can we afford to pump money into the system, and how does it catch up to us one way or another, inflation or otherwise? And because of that, we're kind of keeping an eye on the pulse of like where all this goes, and do we see the economy sort of like come back to life, so to speak, or are we continuing to mess up our response to COVID? I just heard that, for instance, France is going back into full lockdown as of today, which is something that does not bode well for, as you can imagine, the economy, right? So it's all on life support right now, no pun intended. But how much longer can we see sort of like bifurcated sort of amazing behavior in the tech space and everything else collapsing, right? So because of that, we're fairly cautious.
Absolutely. And so, as we've kind of seen that in this past quarter, it's been at its second highest in the past 2 years. But it seems like a majority of that has been in growth investments, right? Anything from more 20 million investments plus. And there's been kind of a decline in seed and angel funds. But coupling that with a trend that I've seen around this idea of like a big seed, and so can you give a little bit of context around that? So maybe for an early founder in the room who's looking to raise money, like how has that dynamic changed? And then kind of coupling that with, the idea of Facebook, and when it came, right, they didn't need to make revenue for many years. And that was a thought in the community that, you develop the product and then the money will come. How has that changed, and how is that changing?
So I won't belabor too much the cliche that I think everyone's heard for the past, I would say actually predating COVID. I think for me, the moment that really illustrate that shift toward the importance of essentially at least having a line of sight into profitability came with the S1 for WeWork, right? And I feel that this was really a moment of reckoning for the industry where, in part due to the numbers that were in the S1, in part due to sort of like the arrogance of the S1 and the way it was worded. And probably I would say, and this is not personal, but I don't think that Adam Neumann did himself any favors in the way that he handled the press. So he ended up being a little bit of like the embodiment of that trend, right? And as a result of that, I think that because we had to pull the IPO, right, and not go through with it, I think it gave a lot of people significant pause as to like, okay, when can we legitimately see exits if we've now found where sort of like the edge is, right? Like we kept pushing and at some point you kind of got to a limit. And so that to me was the turning point, right? Obviously, COVID only precipitated that. And I would say if I were to add one generality to that, is like, I don't think COVID created many trends of any kind. I think what it acted as was more like an accelerant to a lot of stuff that was already latent in the system, right? So I think that's the first part of my answer on this. Going back to your point around sort of what do we tell founders what to expect? I almost think of the funding landscape as sort of working backwards from public markets, right? If you think about what comes just before that, it's a private equity round, it's a growth stage round. Those guys get more or less emboldened based on what they think the liquidity window looks like at the step just after them, right? So if, like right now, the last 3-4 months have been amazing because we've seen so many companies go public, right? And so that gives a lot of confidence to late stage investors that they can expect to take their companies public. Their time frame is much shorter, right, than, let's say, a seed stage investor. Once we see that public market sort of slow down, or we see a correction, or we see the IPO window close, right, then you have to imagine that the effects percolate back upstream, short term, as in right away into the late stage rounds, and then slowly into early stage rounds, right? Because presumably, if I'm investing today in a seed stage company, I don't expect that I will get liquidity out of that investment for another 10 years, right? So rationally, I shouldn't freak out that the market just went down, right? Assuming I have funds to deploy. So that's the other side of that. Like, where are your as an investor, where are your funds coming from? And so if you've just raised a fund, and you have commitments from very strong LPs you're not worried about in terms of their ability to make capital calls, then you suddenly have an obligation toward your LPs to deploy capital, versus if you're either running toward the end of your fund, or if maybe you're an individual investor who may be looking at the public market to sort of fund that, then you have a very different outlook. Let me pause there. By the way, I don't know if the protocol is that people can ask questions, but feel free. I'm more than happy to derail the story and answer any questions. So don't hesitate. I know that there's a chat going to do just that.
I think these are
answering your question.
These are absolutely great responses to this, and I think the audience is appreciating it. I know we do have a time sense, so thinking about that, Oullier, how much time do we have to the open questions?
So how I see, there's one question. So you have like another question, I think. So we can go with that and then take the question. It's more in ESG investing. So go ahead.
All right, no, definitely. So I had a bunch of questions. Obviously, Jean has such an institutional knowledge and wide range of experience, but what's a good last one here? So I guess from the, I guess extrapolating a little bit. So we talked about what it's like for an angel investor, how are investors looking at angel investments, but when you're actually looking at from, as we talk about trends here often, right? Every couple months on Twitter, we have something new come out. We have blockchain, right? We have GPT-3 just came out, right? Associated artificial intelligence, machine learning. But like, how do you as an investor almost make that decision not to fall into the FOMO of chasing something versus keeping stable? For example, something like a Clubhouse, for example, right? We thought consumer was going somewhere, it was fading away, and then all of a sudden Andreessen came in and wrote this really large check, and now we see a lot of people trying to make consumer products. So how, as an investor, do you think about that approach? And then for actually a startup founder, how would you tell them to not, to position themselves in thinking about what to start?
So to be very candid, I will say that my attitude in that regard has shifted over time. In part because earlier on rather, so even though I've been with the firm, the venture firm that I'm investing with for close to 2 years now, I've been investing for about 10 years. And initially my so-called deal flow was what I would call purely sort of circumstantial and attached mostly to my network, right? So Prince, you and I worked together for a few years, then you move on and you do something else with your life. I hear, because we catch up over a glass of wine, that you're thinking of starting a company. I know you're very, resilient, greedy person. And I go, wow, I'd love to back what you're doing, right? That's what I mean by sort of circumstantial deal flow, because I did not study the space you're working on. I just happen to know you. I know you're a great guy. I know you're going to figure it out. Great, right? Over time, what I found is that certainly investing at the venture stage, so a Series A or a Series B round, where you are not necessarily trying to discover companies, they're very much, visible, right? Because these people are trying to find customers. So, they're known to the world. So it's less about mining for gold. It's more about analyzing what's going on in the market. And as a result of that, I found that where I feel much more comfortable investing is focusing on very few areas where I get to know a market and industry, getting to know people who are making change happen in the right direction in that space, and then trying to be helpful to those people. Hopefully I don't only know founders, I also know other investors, I know potential customers of those people. And so by trying to be helpful, we quickly get to know each other, like outside of the context of writing a check, but really more truly around like, can I add value to what the company is trying to do? And so that really takes away, or at least take down, this feeling of FOMO, because you're not trying to run after everything. You accept from the get-go that you're only going to look at a couple of things that matter to you. Obviously, you're also opportunistic. So if someone shows up and says, look, this is the best team in the best market with the best product, anyone would be crazy not to look at that. But you balance that with something that you research much more proactively and where you get a little bit more knowledgeable. And then the last thing I'd say on this is one other way to sort of like let the FOMO sort of like pass you by, right? Is that a lot of these things, how much a company is able to raise is actually not necessarily a good predictor of how well they do, right? Years and years ago, someone sort of joked that celebrating fundraising is a little bit like celebrating someone having gone to the market to buy groceries, right? You still have to cook the meal and people have to show up to buy it at your restaurant, right? And so, I'm always trying to remember that, because often it's easy to get caught in the dynamic. Someone gets hot, right? And you don't know why, but for some reason they're great at fundraising and they're able to get the term sheet from the best people out there. I'm not dismissing that, but it's only part of the story, right? And so, trying to stay away from that dynamic, I would say. And then last thing, a lot of the stuff that you see on Twitter as blowing up, right? I think it would be more accurate to say that it's suddenly appearing. So think of it as like the tip of the iceberg, right? It's been brewing for a while. GPT-3 suddenly shows up on Twitter, but that's only because GPT-2 has been brewing and GPT-1 was there. And so if you actually have been in that space for a number of years, it's no surprise, right? And so now you're like, okay, great, now it's visible, but you're not actually trying to catch up. You know the space, you know what the sudden improvements are, what their weaknesses are and whatnot, right? And so it's kind of like driving, you don't want to be looking at your windshield, you want to be looking half a mile down the highway and things are slowing down. And that's very true in that space, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Jean. I think there's a lot of takeaways there. And so we do have a short time here and we do have a question and in representation to the Global Shapers community, I'd say this is probably the one we wanted to ask, which is, Jean, do you focus on impact investing in your portfolio? And this refers not only negative screening through ESG factors, but actively looking for investments that have a financial and social/environmental return.
Yeah, very much so. So Partech has integrated that component. I don't know that we've done it in a way that's very formalized, although as you can imagine, right, we ourselves as investors, as general partners, and everyone on the team, as well as our LPs, are increasingly aware of sort of not to overload the term, but the impact we can have, right, in not being totally neutral to where we deploy capital just purely based on returns, but sort of like the intent and what we want to see in the world, right? And so it's always something that's top of mind for us. Are we deploying capital in something that's going to cause, emissions to go even worse, or are we, for instance, helping in that exact same regard by, promoting behaviors in consumers or enterprise customers that actually reduce, so think of it as like we're playing that same domino effect, but like two levels down, right? So that's very much something that informs, I would say, every deal we look at.
That makes sense. And so we actually can take one more question. And so there seems to be too little preparation, and this is from Thomas McConnell. And the last one was actually from Zineb Tuzani. So thank you for asking the questions. And yes, this will be the last question of the evening. And so it is, there seems to be too little preparation and conversations on the industries that are heading, if not already there, such as commercial real estate, hospitality, passenger transportation, and local governance. Do you agree that markets, quote unquote, government leaders are keeping their head in the sand?
So not to answer a question with a question, but I want to make sure I understand the question correctly. What are we referring to when we say there's too little preparation and conversation? Within these industries, on these industries, I just want to make sure I understand the question.
Yes, heading towards bankruptcy.
Oh. So let me repeat let me replay the question to make sure I understand. So you're saying, if indeed we are headed toward a sort of like a bit of an Armageddon scenario, not to be overly dramatic, right? Are we having the right conversations, or are we in denial? Is that a fair?
Yes, exactly. Very good. Mm-hmm.
So first of all, I'm no specialist. That's the first thing I'll say, right? I think that, to be candid, and I'll just maybe pick one piece of the puzzle, right? If you think about commercial real estate, what underpins the outcome there is a set of so many components. I just take one of them as an example to illustrate the fact that, in my opinion, like, we might not know exactly where we're headed. I'm sure you've all seen the announcements that a lot of companies made around long-term changes in their policies around remote work, right? But what's equally interesting to me is the ramifications of these announcements on the part of employees. Some of them are extremely excited about the fact that they are going to get the flexibility to work from anywhere. Others are actually worried about what that means to their social fabric, right? They actually want to be in an office, and then there's like this equally complex question of like, do we let people work 100% of the time remotely, or do we mandate people to show up 2 days a week? In which case, you can no longer move to the middle of the country where life is cheaper. You're still stuck, in San Francisco where rents are expensive. So only raising these questions to illustrate the point that, in my mind at least, we're inventing the solution as we go right now when it comes to like the workplace. And just to be a little bit more optimistic for a second, I think that ultimately we land on an environment where we've accepted to take the safety measures we need to, when it comes to COVID per se, right, as one instance of a pandemic, as opposed to like, let's not assume we have a pandemic every year for the rest of our lives. You know, we get past COVID eventually. Are we in a situation where we can absolutely say we're done with the office? Or are people actually looking forward to go back? There's actually a lot of ramification, right? I'm sure you've all experienced the fact that because you're spending so much more time at home, you're on Zoom all the time. Is the studio you live in with a partner maybe big enough? Are you looking to upgrade, you know, to a larger space? What does that mean? Like, who's bearing that cost? You know, is your employer letting go of their offices and like suddenly giving you a stipend so you can live larger, so you can actually be productive? I think we are very early in terms of actually landing on what that looks like without destroying culture. How do people still feel part of a company and don't turn into mercenaries? Again, I don't have the answers, but I'm just saying, you know, maybe too early to call the solution. With that said, Thomas, I totally agree with you. It's frightening to think about how deep the cascading effects go, right? Because if I rent an apartment or if I rent an office and I break my lease, and my landlord, who has been resisting lowering the rent for years and years, suddenly cannot service their debt, what does that mean to the financial industry and so on and so forth, right? So I actually don't know what conversations are happening in these spheres, but I do agree with you that these are crucial facets of what happens to our economy at large, right? Are we headed into another massive crisis if we don't essentially find ways to function as an economy in spite of the health crisis we're dealing with right now?
Yeah, thanks for that, John. And maybe I can just comment quickly on the government side of things, where I've been partnering with cities through this U.S. digital response over the past several months, and have been working with a handful of cities in I'd say the top 25 populated cities around the United States. And I may not have as much perspective on the policy side around business to business, but for the first time, it's fascinating seeing the care and attention that local cities are taking to be able to meet their constituents' needs for the bottom 90% generally. So on that side, I could attest that the people in government are doing everything they can to meet the needs of food security, dealing with housing crisis that's looming upon us, and many other of the basic services that we do take for granted generally. So, but yeah, on the larger scale, that's a much bigger question. But definitely want to thank Jean for taking the time. This could go on forever. The wealth of knowledge you have is uncanny. So thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Definitely.
Thank you all so much. It was a true pleasure.
Yes, no, pleasure's ours. Thank you. And we definitely want to hand it over to Oliver, Sherry, and Maria on the next session around understanding your brain's health. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Maria, Sherry, and Olivier. Sherry.
Hi, yeah, so
Hello, everyone.
I will kick us off. I think that was a great discussion about kind of the impacts of COVID on kind of larger society and organizations. And I think we're going to go and zoom in a little bit on the micro impacts on individuals, and particularly thinking about brain health. And so I think what we really want to start with, I'd love to hear Masha and Oliver provide kind of their perspectives on what is brain health, and from your backgrounds, maybe we can start with you, Oliver, just like what defines brain health for you, and maybe from a scientific perspective, like how should we be thinking about that?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. the Global Shapers and the Rotary. It's a pleasure to be interacting with you today. What is really important to understand is brain health is as important as physical health. All our employers now are very aware that we need to take care of our bodies. We see a lot of organizations that are supporting, sponsoring gym memberships. However, what about our brain health? We talk a lot about mental health, but there is a stigma about mental health because for a lot of people, speaking about mental health equals shrink, equals being crazy. I'm not exaggerating here. A lot of studies have shown that there is a strong stigma about it. Hence, being a little bit down one day, or a lot actually, or being depressed is part of life. This is part of being human. And as such, it needs to be taken into account when it comes to who we are and how our employers, care about us. So brain health care is as important as physical healthcare. And actually, there wouldn't be any complete and efficient healthcare without brain healthcare. What does that mean? It means that maybe we need to have a proactive approach to brain health. This proactive approach, it's just like you don't wait until you don't feel well in your body in order to exercise. You anticipate that. It's the same with brain health care. It's not just about helping people when they are down. It's about understanding. It's about anticipating. It's about relying on science because this is a science. This is actually the convergence of many sciences. When you think about it, we heard a lot of people a few days ago because it was mental health care and mental health day. A lot of people advocating for those who suffer in silence most of the time to reach out. Well, you know what? Part of brain health issues is not being or not feeling able to reach out to others. So if on top of everything, you got people telling you, hey, you should reach out, it puts even more pressure on those people who suffer. It is us as humans, us as organizations, who need to put in place dialogues, who need to put in place metrics that allow to rigorously and scientifically, and more importantly, humanly, being able to detect when things are not okay with someone, when things are okay, but they are, very close to not being okay. And this requires for us to care. This requires for us to interact. And of course, it's harder and harder for a lot of people to interact through screens. Yet there is this new vocabulary, there is new ways for us to interact with each other that we've started to learn through this crisis. And part of it is this spontaneous reach, texting a friend or calling, and not straight away telling people, hey, I feel you're down, what's going on? No, engage in a conversation, talk about everything and nothing, and maybe, subtly, smoothly, move into the topic of anything you want to share. But putting pressure on people, even with the best intention, can have really negative effects. So back to where we are today, one of the good things is a lot of organizations and employers are very aware that in addition to the pandemic, so the health crisis that we're experiencing, the economic crisis, the societal crisis, there is a brain health crisis that is not around the corner, that is already there. The problem being, if we were talking about something that is related to our heart, cardiovascular issues, we would be measuring the heart activity. We wouldn't just be relying on a bunch of questions and interviews or introspection in order to understand how people feel. When it comes to brain health, there are very few solutions that existed 5 years ago that were allowing to measure where it happens, the brain, the human brain, in order to have rigorous scientific data that would inform the strategies that would help people. And again, not help people because they are already deeply experiencing depression or anxiety. But we now have a technology that allows to measure very rigorously whether people are stressed or distracted. And that allows to customize the day of work, to relieve people from some workload. And I think this is the beauty of it. It's thanks to technology this technology that for a lot of people, feel is isolating us from each other. This technology allows also to personalize our day of work, to personalize the care that our employers and our colleagues can provide us. Because all these one-size-fits-all solutions, like, take a deep breath, etc., sure, can work, but it doesn't work for everyone. Some people need to go into mindfulness. Some people like me need to lay on their back and listen to Bach in order to feel better. Some people just need to take a nap. Whatever works for you is great, as long as you're allowed to do it, as long as others understand that we function differently, and that it's not because some well-being guru is going to tell an entire company, speak to thousands and thousands of people and saying, you should be doing A, B, C, D. Come on. This is the exact opposite of understanding how different we are and how science can help us in this approach. The other thing that is important is, in addition to everything that is related to our personal life, to our professional lives, is all these wonderful things that us humans have created. Art is one of them. And the benefits of art, and I think this is Masha's expertise. And I think this is time I spoke enough to hear about Masha, but how it affects positively our brains, whether we are being creative or whether we're benefiting from these people who are doing wonderful things with instruments, hands, bodies, dancers, musicians, etc. But I promised I stop, so I stop here.
Thank you so much, Oliver, for such an amazing answer, also very scientifically based. And as I said, I'm here as a musician first, technology second. So I will be talking purely from my own experience as an artist, classical composer, also producer and educator. And well, as Oliver said, of course, art and the power of creative expression, has proven significant role in healing both body and mind. And speaking about personal experience, as an artist and educator, very much, working with very wide range of people of very different age, from different countries, very different cultures, different mentalities, different classes. To me personally, such thing like brain health, and understanding where the original problem is coming from is actually pretty much about missing a connection, about the connection that is missed between people, the connection that people are missing with themselves, the connection that is missed between our body and mind. And that's where we have a very wide range of different kind of psychotic disorders. Because speaking about our health, about our body reflects pretty much everything that is happening in our brain. So it happens in our brain first. Then, of course, it affects our chemistry, and that's how it affects all the processes in our body. And it would be a very rhetorical question, and actually it is, what we can do to restore this missing connection, right? But this is actually where technology and neuroscience can be really very helpful. And for example, speaking of connecting things, just to show how everything is connected and interconnected, how our thoughts can be connected with our movement, how movement and our mood and our even biofeedback can be audioalized and visualized. That's where such thing as, for example, virtual and augmented reality and neuroscience really do pretty amazing work. And from my own experience, we've been using virtual and augmented reality for visualizing a physical and emotional trajectory of a live performance. That's how we have been doing it in performing arts. We have been building a virtual reality music education platform, which is pretty much about visualizing music, visualizing a task and the process. And it's interesting, before the whole pandemic has started, I've started to work with a project, music and neuroscience project with Grammy-winning team of artists and producers, composers, and also Manhattan Symphony Orchestra. And we have started purely from an artistic point of view. You know, I'm writing this this piece for orchestra, violinist, and violinist brainwaves, and we were supposed to have a concert in Carnegie Hall late December. Now it's moved, hopefully to July, but of course, you know, we don't know where we are and where we're going to be in a couple of months. But at the beginning of pandemic, you know, also because we did a bunch of testing, you know, a lot of people tested our prototype, we have noticed an amazing benefit from people hearing their brain audialized and visualized. It has been giving them the sense of the connection between their bodies and their minds. You know, when we just put together these connections, people start feeling better. People sleep better. Their blood pressure goes down. Their blood sugar goes down. They feel better about themselves. So that's where such things as technology, you know, and neuroscience can really be very helpful for brain health, and also just connecting all of these things together, such as I said, like as art, technology, and neuroscience. When we put all of these things together, that's where we are restoring these missing connections between our bodies and minds. We're restoring missing connection that we have with ourselves. We're restoring the missing connection that we have with people around. And, you know, you can look at this question even like broader, you know, because then we come to realization that not just people within a family, but also people between different countries, you know, just have lost somehow this really like mutual language and understanding and connection. So it's interesting, you know, how this very little thing that is just coming from our head and is just about connection between our body and mind. I see that Oliver has something to say about it.
No, if you allow, I want to build on what you just said. What is really interesting is to see that this connection has never disappeared if in the minds of those people who are selling us solutions for wellness. I mean, the brain in itself is totally useless. If you take the brain and you put it on the table, nothing's going to happen. The brain starts to be useful the moment it interacts with the body that encapsulates it. And movement is at the core of every cognitive aspect of our lives. I've got a question for those of you who are parents. Have you seen a baby that speaks before they move, before they walk?
Well,
the ability to speak, cognition is built out of a sensory motor interaction that a baby has with the world. Cognition and emotions are embodied. This is why sometimes when we're stressed, we've got this gut feeling. It's not just the brain. It is the people who have been creating this dichotomy. In our bodies, the dichotomy doesn't exist. And this is where art is bringing everything together. And one of our aspects that is bringing this together, where art contributes, and I think this is where it would be great to hear from Cherry, is the community aspect, is the fact that art is bringing all of us together when we experience it. It can be a collection of individuals sitting next to each other and experiencing a performance or a piece of art in a very individual way until the moment they exchange information with each other, where emotion is being contagious, positive or negative. In the case of art, hopefully positive one. But Cherry, if you would like to share with us your views, because we had a prep call and you had very insightful points regarding the importance of community in brain health and how we need to leverage art, technology, and whatever this new normal, as some people call it, which I mean, nothing is ever normal for me. It's always different. But anyway, this new normal is bringing us together, this kind of dichotomy between alone and together.
Yeah, I think really great points from both of you. And I think when we talk about, the new normal and communities, I think part of it is, it really ties back a lot to the point that you made earlier about stigma. And I think there's a lot that we need to, from my personal view, you know, we don't have a good sense for what's normal if we don't have access to other people. And that's really where we find out like how if something is normal is being around others and seeing how they behave. And so I think there can be a tendency to think like certain feelings of anxiety or depression or anything like that that a lot of people are going through aren't actually normal because we're in isolation. But the more that we're in communities, like we know certain reactions or feelings to what we're going through are quite normal, and understanding that. So I think that's really where in the workplace, it's really important to even just normalize a big aspect of that. Like from my personal experience, we're seeing more companies where they're encouraging people to block out time on their calendars where they're going to therapy, or just say like, hey, I'm taking a mental health day, in more progressive companies where that's being possible. And so that people can see like, you know, this is a coping mechanism and this is something that other people are doing and it's totally okay. And then creating spaces, I think, where it's okay to have upfront conversations about all of this. I'm also curious from my own standpoint, I've done, you know, some improv comedy in the past, and there's like some sort of power. I don't know if there's anything that we scientifically know about like the impact of laughter or joy or all of that on our brains and our brain health, but you know, it feels like being in person and feeling those emotions together is something different. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how laughter, emotions, and those things like impact your brain, or even music. Like what do we see from how people's brains are really changing with that?
So we're able now to measure the brain virtually everywhere. Measuring brain activity is no longer something that you have to do in medical facilities or scientific labs in those big, expensive scanners. My company is the global leader in portable brain scans, and our latest form factor is earbuds that people can work in the workplace. We can measure in real time and scientifically the level of stress of people, the level of attention and distraction, and then create what are now called closed loop workstations that adapt to who you really are in a given moment, not based on a bunch of questions that you were asked through a personality test 10 years ago when you were hired, or 3 years ago. I'm not the same person on a Monday and on a Friday when it comes to how tired I am. And it depends whether my baby kept me awake. I'm tired, it happens. And what you stressed is really important. Creating safe spaces, normalizing the dialogue. You know, if your body is sore, some people go and get a massage. Well, if your brain is sore, go and get a conversation, go to therapy. This is absolutely normal. And the more we're going to exchange about it, the more we're going to see that this is science in action, and that there are solutions that are informed by science, the more we're going to help people. I'd say, as an advice, we've all been approached as leaders, managers of organizations by people who own or claim they own solutions for us to feel better and to handle this mental health tsunami that is hitting us. Just ask them what kind of measures they're using. Ask them what kind of personalization of their solutions they're employing. What is their level of customization? When it comes, this is very simple, think about it. If you were the CEO of a company, of a construction company, and you would have tall and shorter people, you would not dress them, you would not give them the same helmets. You would have different sizes of helmets. You would have different sizes of tools, of clothes, of protective clothes. This is exactly the same when it comes to brain health. It needs to be customized. It needs an investment that goes beyond beautiful words that people would claim in saying, oh, feel well, breathe, etc. Yes, all these exercises, all these activities are part of a solution. But if you don't measure before, during, and after how your body and your brain reacts to it, it can be useless. And some are very rushed solutions that have been taken because people, and it's, leaders of organizations, public and private, are genuinely concerned about their employees. So they rush to take decisions. Maybe some of the good intentions will turn into dramatic decisions in the future when it comes to allowing people to work from home indefinitely. Based on which data? on data that has been collected not while people were working from home only, but working from home during a pandemic.
I wanted to bring it up as a part of our discussion, and now we also have a question about it. Actually, what is really normal? What defines normal? You know, because culture actually is the key, as one of our members actually wrote in their questions. Because depending on what country you are in, you know, like your behavior, that's, everyone understands, you know, the way how people behave in one country will not work for another country, you know, just because of mentality and culture is different. So my question actually to both, to Cherry and to Oliver is, I'm actually, guys, very curious to hear, what do you think is normal, you know, like normal for brain, normal healthy brain? There
is no such thing as normal. We should ban this word from our vocabulary, and we just, yes. Again,
exactly.
You know, I love tailor-made clothes. I love tailor-made interactions with people. I don't like normal as a word or as a state of mind.
Normal.
That's my very biased opinion.
Like, you remember Lewis Carroll, when Alice in Wonderland, she was asking a cat. I was reading it in Russian, sorry, so I'm translating it in my head right now. She was asking him just like, where can I meet anyone normal? And the answer to that was, normal? No, they don't exist. Everyone is so different. So there's no such thing as normal. Okay.
Cherry might have a different opinion.
Yes, maybe.
I think I very much agree with that. And the more you can make people feel like there's no norm or there's no standard that they have to live into, the more inclusive of a workplace or an organization that you're going to have. And so it's all about just making sure that people understand that. But I think another side from norms that was pointed out is kind of the cultural concept, or kind of the familial, that side of things. And so we actually have a question here that I think is interesting, which is, you know, it seems like traditional societies with extended families handle this stress better than our modern societies. So how can we apply those lessons learned? Which maybe to broaden the question, you know, what can we take about the impact of culture on brain health and how that's kind of impacting how people are dealing with different sorts of stressors in society?
Well, stress is a good example. There is no such thing as a single definition of stress. Stress can be very good and can be very bad. If you're not stressed enough, you don't perform well. If you're too stressed, you don't perform well. It's about finding that range that defines your level of alertness, your level of attention and focus, where you feel well enough, excited enough, engaged enough in order to perform or to enjoy something. And when it comes to cultural differences, what is interesting is to see that the way our bodies express stress might vary from one culture to another. The way our brains experience stress is not as different when you measure things. And this shows that, again, what you see on the surface is not enough. You cannot judge the book by the cover. You cannot judge the culture by what you see only. Measurements of where it really happens matter, be it in the brain, be it in the blood, be in all physiological measures that we can gather. And I think this is very important. And I'm handing over to Masha, who gave us a very good example earlier when she was thinking in Russian and expressing differently. Right, Masha?
Right. Yes, Oliver, you're pretty much correct. And actually, here we have a question that from Thomas McConnon, which I will try to answer because I'm a professional educator and I've been working with children for years. So the question is like, what long-term effects will some children have by learning remotely for a year and not getting socialization when attending school? It's a really interesting question, which I think different parents, different educators, and even different children, different students can answer differently. Of course, the moment of real human interaction, socialization is extremely important. But basically everyone is talking about negative effects. I don't think that there's any situation in the world, in any case, that comes without just only bad things, without any benefits. from my experience as an educator, I see actually tremendous progress in my students of very different age, which like right now, currently I have like the range of my students goes from 7-year-old to 73-year-old. And now when people don't have to spend so much time on travel, you know, as actually Sean just brought up before our conversation, we actually we have much more time to concentrate on the task. And now when people are also spending much more time with their parents, they also can be more controlled by parents. So I can say that within the last 5-6 months, most of my students showed the progress, you know, like probably without exaggeration, I wouldn't want to say it's like 200% better, but probably without exaggeration, it was 50% better, which is huge, you know.
But Masha, isn't there a bias, a recruitment bias? Because I totally agree with you. I can share an experience as a parent on that. But here we're talking about people who maybe have a time and the means to take lessons with you. Who basically can afford some time to spend on things, can afford a space that allows them to do that can afford time on their own. But the great majority of people on this planet are experiencing isolation in tiny spaces, and the lack of interaction will have negative aspects. I totally agree with you on one point. I'm the proud father of 2 ballerinas at the National Ballet in France. And the fact that they no longer drive and commute, they save 2 hours a day. And those 2 hours, they sleep more and they started to read different things and to explore different things. So what they lose in physical presence and physical interaction with school, they gain in something else. But my kids are hyper privileged. They are not representative of what is happening at the moment on the planet.
Yes, here I agree with you, Oliver. So this would be the question to those people who can affect the existing system, because even that system that has been there before COVID needed some changes and innovations. And like, for example, at the very beginning of the pandemic, with a group of Grammy-winning artists, producers, and right now we're 34 countries. We are related to all leading musical institutions in the world, in the US and in the world. We have created music charity organization, which produces and delivers multinational live virtual concerts and education experiences to such places, the most isolated places, even those places they were isolated even before the COVID times, you know. And now everyone knows what this isolation means, what quarantine, social distancing is, but not that many people actually are talking about such a huge realization that there are millions of people who have been living in the state of isolation, quarantine, social distancing as the only normal, speaking of normal, that they have ever known. So what we have been doing, you know, just contributing to society, the world society, not only in the US, you know, just helping with what we can. We've been doing these concerts for orphanages, for hospitals, for hospices. Right now we're trying to bring it to juvenile facilities. So actually, this is where technology also versus like live interaction also can be beneficial, because you technically can't put artists from 15 different countries and 7 different time zones together in one room, and also to bring them deliberately to those people who are in isolation in Ukraine, in China, in India, in South Africa, in wherever. And that's what we can do. And it's interesting, you know, because I think a lot of where the focus of investment, social program, grants, governmental help should be focused right now actually is to reinvigorate the system of education, the system of helping exactly those people, as you totally were correct to bring up the point, who can't actually afford just going and paying for a private class, you know, to a teacher who would be deliberately just delivering this information.
This is where words matter a lot. This is where matter a lot. The whole concept of social distancing is such a mistake. We do not need social distancing. We need social closeness. What we need is physical distance in order to fight this virus.
Yeah.
And technology afford really allows this social closeness that physical distance is putting. For a lot of people,
that's very interesting. Sorry, like how this word has been misused, kind of like we
apologize.
all have been saying social distancing, and actually, in fact, yes.
But let me finish. Let me finish to explain why. So we've worked with organization, and even the WHO has changed the narrative in March after we brought this topic with a bunch of behavioral and brain scientists. Here is the major issue with the situation, whether we're talking about organization and government. Until we find a vaccine, COVID-19 can only be slowed down, countered, fought, choose your word, by changing our habits, by changing our behaviors. And now here is a question to all of you who are leaders of organizations. How many behavior and brain scientists are you consulting in order to inform your strategy? There are physicians everywhere, epidemiologists. But the one thing we need to understand is how to change the behavior of people. What are the incentives? What is the pace of these incentives to change the behaviors of people? And those people who have that expertise, who are experts in behavior change, are not employed at the moment by most governments. And you cannot change behaviors without relying on the right expertise. You know, you're not going to expect someone who makes bread to teach you violin, unless the exception of a baker that is an expert in violin. We need to change behaviors. In order to change behaviors, we need to understand humans. In order to understand humans, we need to use psychology, cognitive science, anthropology, sociology, all these sciences, and to put them to good use. If we don't do so, we'll only have a partial or limited view of what is happening these days.
Well,
we're a little bit out of time, so if I can just quickly summarize some of the takeaways here. I mean, I think some wonderful things that we can do to improve brain health, which is really, one is just changing the conversation, making sure people don't anchor to a definition of normal, consulting and bringing in more experts on brain health into kind of our workspaces and communities, incorporating art, technology to kind of foster this social closeness, physical distance, but social closeness in our communities. If there's, you know, one sentence from each of you that you want to summarize, any other takeaways for the group that I didn't cover, we can just wrap there.
I apologize. I have only 1 more minute, so I want to hand it to Olivier as a speaker. And then we lost our President Gerard is having some issues, so Andrea is gonna wrap up, and I'll give one announcement, and that's it. Thank you. Olivier.
Yeah, it was me.
Well, it's a big thank you to all of you, and really listen, watch, pick up the signs of the people around you, whether you're talking, there are people who are with you physically from your family, but your friends and colleagues. If you see them through video conferencing, if you talk to them, if you see something or read something that sounds different, reach out to them, be proactive, don't wait, be proactive. This is the first step. Then please rely on science. Scientists are as subjective as artists. Science is biased, we're all biased. Unbiased does not exist. Objectivity does not exist. What makes the difference is some methods are more rigorous than others. And what we need to aim at is more rigor in the method. Thank you again to the Rotary and to the Global Shapers for inviting me and allowing me to interact with you. Sherry, Masha, it's been a pleasure. And Bolor, as usual, you've been doing a terrific job in putting all of us together. And President, thank you so much for opening and closing.
My pleasure.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. I wanted to just second the resentment, actually, what our presenter said about Bowler. She deserves all the credit for this wonderful session. I'm not sure that Gerard is fully in the meeting right now. Gerard, if you can.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Then we can conclude with you. I think Bowler wanted to still relate something about the next session, but Gerard, go ahead. Sorry.
All right. You can hear me well, correct?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay. I wanted to thank Global Shapers, Prince, Jean. Thank you so much for that insight. and for Sherry and Masha and Olivier also. Masha has been in discussion with the club about a joint project with us dealing with children in New York City and music education. And you'll hear more about that in the not too distant future. I want to thank everyone who participated tonight again for their insight. These are really very trying times, and there are quite a few questions we all have that don't have ready answers. We may not have answers for quite some time. But in Rotary, the Rotary Club of New York will continue to bring these topics for discussion for all of us so that we continue to make progress in dealing with the pandemic. I remind you that we have a whole series of Zooms planned for the next few months, and you will be getting notification from our executive director, from Andreas, so please make every effort. And I want to thank the board members for their help as well. And I will also now pass this on to Balor, who will give us some further insight into Global Shapers and what's planned for the future. Thank you again for your efforts, and they were tremendous efforts putting this together.
Thank you so much, President Gerard, and thank you so much, everyone, Olivier, Jane, Marcia, Cherry, and Prince, for your time and dedication and bringing incredible information to us. And thank you so much, Rotarians and Global Shapers, joining this call. And we already extended 17 minutes. And I want to make an announcement for our next session. It's going to be like on November 25th, same time, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern time, and we're going to talk about biotech, investment, innovations as well as, and then we are it's under discussion. We're hoping to have another neuroscientist, one of the leading neuroscientists. We're hoping that bring the conversation towards Alzheimer, because even though as a young people, we have to be very careful towards this disease, because we are in a time of extended tech use comparing to previous generation. And so it's very dangerous for our brains. So hopefully we can bring that scientists. So, and stay tuned, and thank you so much for your time. And I really appreciate everyone staying over 18 more minutes with us. Thank you so much again. Have a lovely evening.
Again, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.